chance to meet yet, my name is Sean McSpaden, and in about a month, this will be my 26th year in Oregon State government. It's been quite a ride so far. The first 15 of those years, I served in the executive branch of state government in the office of the state CIO in a variety of different roles, including a 5.5-year stint as Oregon's Deputy State Chief Information Officer. For the last 11 years, after that transition, I moved over to the legislative branch. I've served as a principal legislative IT analyst with fairly broad oversight responsibilities for IT, cybersecurity, GIS, and now artificial intelligence. Certainly top of mind for all of us nowadays. In addition, I've served as the committee administrator for Oregon's Joint Legislative Committee on Information Management and Technology, and in the same role for our Transparency Oregon Advisory Commission. Lastly, recently I was appointed as a member of Oregon's Task Force on Artificial Intelligence and serve as Oregon's representative to the NCSL Task Force on AI, Cybersecurity, and Privacy. It really is a great honor and pleasure to be with you all this morning. Certainly, I love the fact that I get the privilege of being the moderator for today's session. I think we're going to have a great conversation. Of course, to make sure you're in the right room, today's session is entitled Cybersecurity, Expensive but Necessary. And certainly we'll get into a variety of different facets of cybersecurity, why it really is top of mind for every state and local government across the country. So just some opening remarks to set the stage. Ransomware and other cyber attacks threaten the nation's cybersecurity, infrastructure, economy, public health, and safety. The threats and impacts from these attacks seemingly continue to worsen each day for public, private, and nonprofit sector organizations across the nation. Then at the technical level, the cybersecurity landscape is constantly shifting. The cybersecurity workforce within state governments, local governments, they're often outgunned and outnumbered with limited reinforcements available on the horizon. Cybersecurity professionals with the requisite knowledge, skills, and abilities really are scarce, and certainly they're in high demand in all sectors. And although there are multiple cybersecurity workforce development and educational and training programs in states across the country, they typically lack the funding needed to produce enough qualified cybersecurity professionals at a rate and pace to meet the need. Those state and local governments, special districts, universities, and community colleges, education service districts, and K-12 schools and libraries that we all work with every day in our own states, they conduct periodic audits and assessments of their computing environments to really try to understand the current state of cybersecurity in their organizations. And they've progressively been identifying accelerating cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities, and certainly information technology modernization needs that they don't have the funding or capacity to meet alone. They've asked for help from their respective state legislatures, and they've indicated a strong willingness to work collaboratively across sectors and jurisdictions to address these problems. It's often been said that cybersecurity is a team sport. No one is safe or immune, and most organizations and the business and resident customers they serve are vulnerable and underdefended. The problem has grown simply too large for any single organization, sector, or state to solve on its own. So the message to all of us is that we must do it together. With that in mind, the federal government, by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, has created the State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program. This is a non-competitive, formula-based grant program that's expected to provide state and local government and tribal and territorial governments across the nation with approximately $1 billion with required state matching funds between federal fiscal year 2022 and federal fiscal year 2025. Importantly, the state matching funds percentage increases every year of the grant program, and 80% of the grant funds must be distributed to local eligible entities. In addition to that state and local cybersecurity grant program, the United States Government Accountability Office recently published a report in November 2023 on numerous federal grant programs that provide cybersecurity support. GAO identified 27 agencies, believe it or not, 27 federal grant programs that are managed by 8 federal agencies, totaling another $827 million that's available for cybersecurity support. Peeling back the onion, so to speak, cybersecurity is just one of many authorized expenditure categories meant to support broader grant program objectives. That certainly has been the case for many years, but certainly unknown to most, that there is additional available funding for this important purpose. So the message here is that accessing and effectively utilizing these federal grant funds will require coordinated governance, planning, grant application, distribution of funds by state legislatures, and project implementation among and between the executive and legislative branches of state government and between state and local representatives in the months and years to come. The federal government and our states are embarked on creating a whole of government approach to cybersecurity. It really is the new imperative for us all. We have to work together to identify available funding and put it to the best possible use for the greatest number that can be served. NCSL has long recognized the importance of cybersecurity to government operations. As you may or may not know, in 2018, the NCSL Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, Cybersecurity and Privacy published a white paper entitled Budgeting for Cybersecurity. Suffice it to say, budgeting for cybersecurity in our various states, it's a challenging process, in part because implementing security measures is not a finite task. It's a series of interrelated, ongoing processes. Providing adequate cybersecurity resources should not be an afterthought. Rather, cybersecurity risk assessment and mitigation, data security and privacy must inform every step of the system's acquisition and development lifecycle. Building in security from the start, security by design, must be the new mantra. To successfully understand and budget for cybersecurity needs, state legislators and their staff must begin to better understand cybersecurity terminology, better understand the cybersecurity risks that exist, and develop knowledge about the specific activities and resources that can best help public sector organizations in their state plan for, respond to, and recover from cybersecurity events, and critically, when they happen. These cybersecurity incidents will happen, and the rest of us, when it's not our day, it's one of those but for the grace of God go I type of propositions. It will happen someday, and we need to better prepare for it. Legislators and legislative staff need to understand that cybersecurity preparedness and hardening, it's an ongoing process. It's not a one-time activity. It won't be satisfied with one-time funding alone. It requires a maintenance of effort and flexibility in budgeting to address emerging vulnerabilities and threats over the long haul. So whether you're attending this session in person today or watching via live stream, we hope that this morning's session will give you all a better understanding of how states are budgeting for cybersecurity, what federal grant programs are out there, and how states can take advantage of all of that moving forward. Just some quick housekeeping notes for you all as a reminder. This session is being live streamed, and any recording of the session is prohibited unless previous approval has been granted by the NCSL Communications Division. In regard to the structure of the session, I'll introduce each of the speakers. They'll have an opportunity to present their opening remarks. We'll then move to a discussion as a group and follow that up with some audience Q&A. We do want this to be an interactive session, so we definitely encourage you all to begin thinking about your questions that you'd like to ask during that section of our session today. So with all of that out of the way, it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Meredith Ward. Meredith comes to us from the National Association of State Chief Information Officers. She serves as the Deputy Executive Director for that great organization. Meredith, please take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and I know this is one of the last days of your conference, but I want to personally welcome you to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. NASCIO is headquartered here, and I am a lifelong Kentuckian, so I hope you've had some bourbon and maybe I think you're going to Churchill later on today.
We are.
To see a lot of the things that our beautiful Commonwealth offers. So Sean, thank you so much for the introduction, and you really set this up beautifully. A couple of the things that I want to reiterate what Sean said is, number one, and I think we'll all talk about this, cybersecurity is a team sport. So when I came to NASCIO 11 years ago, number one, a lot of people didn't even know what cybersecurity was. Now even my parents in their 70s and 80s, they know what cybersecurity is. So we've made a lot of progress, and the same goes in state government. So we've really seen cybersecurity prevention practices funding become more a part of the fabric of state government, which is where it needs to be. You know, we've all seen some high-profile incidents, whether it's a pipeline disruption, a service interruption. Was anyone flying Delta 2 weeks ago? Yep, Becca was. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So cybersecurity, it impacts real life, whereas maybe 10 years ago, we didn't think that it did. But everyone is impacted by cyber. And so in state governments, it's especially important because you all know, if you all are state legislators and staff and others, states protect a ton of data. States have every single citizen in their state, their data, because or every citizen who files taxes, so we're assuming everyone files taxes, or a lot of folks do. So there's a lot of protection that goes on in state government. So one of the biggest things that, a question that I get asked, especially when I speak to legislators or staff, is when is this whole cyber thing gonna be over and we can stop funding it? Well, I have bad news for you, never.
Never.
And as long as the bad guys are being creative and coming up with new things, it's going to become harder and harder as we go on. So our states, like I said, are in a much better position than they were, 5 or 10 years ago. But we all see that how these things can, cyber incidents can interrupt our daily lives. So every single state faces an attack every single day, multiple attacks, millions every single year. Now that doesn't mean that the attack is successful, but there is an attempt, right? So that happens every single day, all day, every day, and it's going to continue like that. So what I wanted to do is give you a few data points. So NASCIO, we survey our chief information officers, our prime members, and then also there's chief information security officers. So, CIOs, they're in charge of all tech in state governments, and CISOs, who majority of them report to the CIO, they're responsible for cybersecurity. Most of the time, it's executive branch, but there's also instances where the CIO or CISO might provide shared services. I don't know if any of you all know where your cyber services come from in the legislature. Some could be from the CIO or the CISO's office. So I want to talk a little bit about funding. So, cyber funding is a complicated issue because some states are what we call centralized and some states are federated, the model. Does anyone know, hands raised, does anyone know if you have a federated model? Okay. Anyone know if you have a centralized model? So, all right, great. Gentleman in the back, thank you. So basically the difference is in a centralized model, the CIO or central agency is in charge of providing policies and setting standards for all executive branch agencies, right? In a federated state, agencies have a lot more power, individual ability to set policies, to decide what cyber protections that they want, right? Their investment in cyber. So it's not really easy to then, because of that, it's not easy to say this is exactly how much we dedicate to cyber, but we have a pretty good idea. So in most states, it's around the 2 to 5% of their overall IT budgets. And in states, in general, IT budgets are about 2% of overall. Mm-hmm. But what complicates that is most CIO offices are what we call chargeback. So as you all know, legislators, you dole out money to different agencies, and a lot of times state CIO offices, they don't get that money, they charge agencies for their services. So it's an interesting model and one of the only ones, I think, in state government, but that's how we operate. So, like I said, most states are 2 to 5% cyber, 2 to 5% of their tech budget. But in contrast, the federal government and the private sector are 10 to 12%. cybersecurity of IT budgets. So there is a long way that we have to go and to really, get things up to where they need to be. There's been a lot of progress, though. I don't want to leave you all with negative news. So, more than half the states have a dedicated cybersecurity line item, which they did not 2 years ago when we asked. And about 25% of states have increased their cyber budget, so in the last 2 years. So that's fantastic news. And I know that, we're going to get into an example in Texas. And the amazing thing about Texas is they are a federated state. The Republic of Texas, is that insulting? But sometimes people say that, right? So their agencies have a lot of autonomy in what cybersecurity services they want to take and how they want to do business. But what Texas has been able to do, even without that edict, is they've been able to really service and help local governments. And a lot of their agencies are now on board because of the culture that they've created and the things that they've put in place. So I do want to pass it over to these folks to talk about how it works in one state, and then we'll have questions, and I can answer questions if you have how it works in other states.
Wonderful. Thank you, Meredith. Great lead in to our state highlighted example in the great state of Texas. So next we're going to turn to Texas State Representative Giovanni Capriglione. Thank you so much for being with us. Representative Capriglione currently serves as the chairman of the House Committee on Pensions, Investments, and Financial Services, the House Select Committee on Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technologies, and the Innovation and Technology Caucus. He's also the co-chairman of the Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council. As a leader in technology policy that comes before the legislature, Representative Capriglione is looked to for guidance on a multitude of different important topics. He has passed several key pieces of legislation, such as the Texas Cybercrime Act, the Texas Cybersecurity Act, and the Texas Data Privacy and Security Act. He has also passed legislation creating an Artificial Intelligence Advisory Council, created harsher punishments for doxing, addressed IT workforce shortages, and thoughtfully regulated digital asset service providers. In recognition of his great work, Representative Capriglione was awarded the 2024 Bob Bullock Award for Outstanding Public Stewardship, the 2023 Texas Association of Business Technology Policy and Innovation Award, and the 2023 Technology Champion Award from the National Association of State Chief Information Officers. Finally, he was awarded the 2022 Champion of Innovation Award from TechNet. So Representative Capriglione, it's great to have you with us. I'll turn things over to you for your opening remarks.
Great, thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I want to get right away to the title of this, which is Cybersecurity is Expensive but Necessary. And it's interesting because a lot of us think about it as an actual role of government, right? That it is a critical responsibility that the state has. But we still feel like we have to explain that it is a critical role. But if you think about some of the other roles of government, they're all expensive and necessary. So take, for instance, quality public education. Significant investment, whether it's in the schools, the teachers, the time and the effort to go and educate students, but it's an investment, right? It's an investment in trained workforce and personal development and economic growth. You look at maybe infrastructure investing, right? Why we invest in roads and in bridges. It's expensive. It takes a lot of capital costs to do that, but we do that in order to improve economic growth for the safety of the citizens. And cybersecurity, to me, is exactly the same thing, right? Sure, it's an investment in a trained workforce that is able to do, to handle the technical aspects of it. There's an expense in the hardware and the software in order to protect the citizens. But ultimately, the whole purpose of that is to protect our security, is to protect our safety, our children's online privacy, our personal data that is all being collected and stored by the state. And so for me, as we start to look at it more like an actual service, I think it becomes easier for us in the legislature, in particular, to be able to explain to our colleagues, okay, why we should continue to invest this. I mean, Texas has, I think our budget last biennium was about $360 billion, right? So pretty significant for the biennium. But a lot of that is taken up by critical services, and cybersecurity is one of those things that I'm glad that we were able to invest in for the state. And we've seen those benefits all the time. We see that it's one of the highest paid jobs that we have in the state. We've been able to do it to protect against cyber attacks that are going from nation states or others. But it's always going to be a challenge. But so is quality public education funding, and so is infrastructure funding. So I'm looking forward to continuing to use the legislature and talking to my colleagues about making sure that they see why it's just as important.
Thank you, Representative. And to demonstrate the partnership that the Texas legislature and state government in Texas has, next up we have Brady Vaughn, who serves as the Chief Strategy and Stakeholder Engagement Officer for the Texas Department of Information Resources. Brady, it's great to have you with us. As I mentioned, Brady works with the Texas Department of Information Resources. In this role, he assists in implementing the strategic vision of the agency, its leadership, along with overseeing interactions and ensuring positive relationships with key stakeholders, including the Texas legislature, related to state technology and his agency. Brady has more than a decade in working in Texas state budget processing in the government and political campaigns. Prior to joining DIR, which is the acronym for that agency, he worked in the office of the Attorney General's Government Relations Division and spent 5 sessions in the Texas legislature, with the majority of that time in the House Appropriations and Senate Finance Committees. Brady graduated from Oklahoma State University with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a focus on international business. Brady, it's great to have you with us. Would love to have your opening remarks.
Yeah, thank y'all. Can y'all hear me? A little closer. All right, better.
Great.
So, a little bit of background. Thanks, Sean, for that. I did work in the legislature for 12 years doing budget for members in the House and Senate and in both the committees, as he mentioned, and did work in the Attorney General's office. And I've been, it's hard to say now, 4+ years at DIR, Department of Information Resources. It's flown by when you have good bosses and you have a good job. It's really entertaining. As Meredith mentioned, Texas is a federated state, and having worked in the budget process for that long, I've seen the evolution of how we've approached cybersecurity and cybersecurity funding, and it's really grown, and a lot of it has been due to members like Chairman Capriglione and the leadership that he's had, the forethought that he's had to create the different committees and approach cybersecurity the way that we've gone about it. So kind of as a federated model, DIR is, I kind of think we're unique to most state agencies that kind of approach this subject area. We kind of set that statewide standards and policies. We have one of the largest cooperative contract programs in the nation. And then, we have a lot of other duties, like the Chief Privacy Officer for us helps with some of the policies with other agencies. We have the state cyber, or CISO, here at our office, and my boss, Amanda Crawford, is the Executive Director and State CIO for the state of Texas. And so it's kind of a statewide approach, statewide kind of policy making that we do there. But state agencies have their own budgets. They set their own individual policies. They choose what they want to do and how they want to utilize our services that we have in Texas. But we also have some programs like Shared Technology Services, which has data center services in it, some security services that we offer to state agencies, and some locals. And we assist in cybersecurity incidents at the state level and also at the local level and statewide, sometimes, hopefully not that often. But when we talk about state or cybersecurity and funding and how expensive it is, we have to kind of talk about some of those incidents and things that we think about. We talked about the not cybersecurity incident, but an incident that we had fairly recently that kind of stopped the world with CrowdStrike. I'm not going to get into specifics about this, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on kind of how it worked with us here in Texas in particular. Cybersecurity, we've all kind of mentioned it, is a team sport. All governmental entities, we're relying on our own internal staff, but also our external partners, and then also, kind of the products that we have to use to make sure that we're in the best posture we can be as possible. These vendors and products, they provide layers of protection, and there's not a silver bullet to anything. And as a state appropriator, or working in the appropriations process and out an agency, like when people ask us, or when a vendor comes to us and says that they can solve all your problems, they can't. So take that in mind, because you have to have different approaches for everything, and it has to be, kind of spread out across that way. But, I've told, the chairman and other ledge members, we as the good guys, our constituents have to use us as state government. There's no choice. You can't, if we have an incident, you can't go to, like say, one company to another. You have to use the state of Texas. You have to give us your data, and we're responsible, and we have to do what we can to protect it. And we have to be 100% on our game 100% of the time, and the bad guys only have to be right once. And they are well funded. They're really good at their jobs, and it is a full-time job for a lot of those bad actors. And so I think that we've done a pretty good job as Texas in a federated model with all the different choice and ways that we go about it. We've done a pretty good job about cybersecurity. And when we're talking about like the basic cybersecurity hygiene, one of those key things is patching. And we kind of do that for some of our customers, and that helps out. But when you see this, there's two real incidents that I think kind of goes back to that when you're pushing out updates and patching things like that. SolarWinds, which is a cybersecurity incident, which everybody knows about that one, and it was not ideal. But then also the more recent one, CrowdStrike. It's those easy things that we preach and say, and that we rely on these vendors that we utilize to do those types of things, and they have to be on top of the game too. But it's one of the things that I do want to say is we've taken the approach when working with legislators and leadership here in Texas is that, like I mentioned, the bad guys are good. We're not going to be perfect every time. We should try to strive to be perfect every time, but we shouldn't blame the state agencies or the people, because it's going to happen, right? Nobody's perfect. Specifically with CrowdStrike, I do want to brag a little bit on our leadership that we had working with us and making sure that we had all the resources that we had, but also our vendor partners. We're, like I mentioned, federated system, federated model. Everybody has choice. Everything's different, so you don't have one script where you can go up and fix the issue. We were up, 50% of our critical infrastructure was up by a COB that day, and all of our critical infrastructure was up within 24 hours, working with state agencies, which were amazing, overnight, long nights, and lots of coffee and caffeine, but then also updating members so that when they were talking to their state agencies and their constituents who couldn't access services, getting it up that quickly was really a testament to how we've set up and what we've done in Texas. So.
Can I interject real quick? So a lot of times, and I just asked and continued, I didn't wait for an answer, sorry. But so a lot of times in cybersecurity. I'm
glad I'm the moderator.
Right? In cybersecurity and in IT, we like to throw around a lot of acronyms and a lot of terms. And one of the issues that I hear a lot, especially from folks who work in other state agencies, it's like, okay, time out, what did you just say? So basically what Brady was saying, the patching issue, everyone who has an iPhone, okay, hopefully, if not, the green people, but anyway. So you see your apps have to update, right? A lot of us have it set to automatic, or you can go in and do it manually. That's the most basic example of what a patch is. So when software developers find out there's an issue, something's causing an issue in their app, they send out what they call a patch. So that is that's what happened in the two incidents that Brady talked about. And also, if there's a term that we use and y'all are like, what does that mean? Stop and ask. Totally fine, no judgment. Sorry, Sean.
That's okay. Thank you, Meredith. Important clarification there. Certainly, we have some services that are automatic and others that state and local government IT professionals and their vendors actually have to do manually. And so with all of us having different structures, different levels of capacity, capability, some organizations can easily handle that task, and others are really in trouble and really need some help from their friends at other levels of government and or in the private sector. So great points, all of you. We are going to move to our next segment of the session today. We'll have more of a brief conversation, group conversation. Meredith already started that, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
But I'd like to turn to Representative Capriglione. You serve as the current chair of the Texas State Select Committee on artificial intelligence and emerging technologies. We're here today to talk about cybersecurity, but I mentioned even in my own role here for NCSL, about 7 years ago we started as a committee focused on cybersecurity only, and then we moved to being a task force on cybersecurity and privacy, and now we're termed the NCSL Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, Cybersecurity and Privacy. So there's some connectivity in all of those issues, and so can you talk a bit about, from your perspective as a leader in the state legislature, the intersection between those two important topics?
Well, I think, like you just said, there's a connection between all of that. I have the privilege of being on two committees, right? So we have our House Select Committee on AI and Emerging Technologies, which is going to be primarily focused on how artificial intelligence, we might be able to create a framework for private industry. We also have the council, the advisory council, and that one's more focused on how state agencies can or cannot or will not be able to use artificial intelligence, acceptable use policies, code of ethics, and that sort of thing. And so we've gotten a lot of input and a lot of feedback, but AI is the new shiny, the really cool new shiny thing. Yeah. But in the middle of all of that, 90% of it is data, right? It's all about the data that's being used to train it. It's all about how these models are going to go and make predictions or make, sometimes completely autonomous decisions based on that data. And so the data, for me, has always been about making sure that individuals' privacy is maintained, right? Like Brady said, you don't have a choice. The government's going to say, give us your fingerprints, give us your face, give us your social security number, give me your phone number and your birthday. But we also then have to make sure that it's not stolen, right? And that's where cybersecurity comes in. And what we've seen in our testimonies, what we've seen is that there's two sides to this AI piece of it. We had, as part of the bill that we passed, we required an inventory, right, of, hey, is anyone using AI? Are they using it for autonomous purposes? And so we just got that report just 2 or 3 weeks ago. And in that report, we have about 200 agencies, and I think we got about 500 or so programs, things that are in our inventory that agencies have said that they're using that are artificial intelligence. And I would say the biggest piece of it is actually being used for cybersecurity, right? Whether that's automatic threat detection, analysis, whatever it is, we are already using it in Texas, and I'm sure a lot of you are in your states too, to use AI to go and protect against those attacks. The flip side, of course, is the bad guys are using artificial intelligence and high-speed computer models and all of that, those types of iterations to go and create even more scary attacks against our agencies. So, like we said, cybersecurity isn't something we're going to be done with at all. It's just going to get bigger and faster, more dangerous, more expensive.
Absolutely. Appreciate your perspective, and certainly we all have to deal, regardless of state, with this issue of not just bring your own device into the environment, but now employees bringing their own AI into the environment, whether it's on the approved list of systems or not. Employees are accessing their private accounts. They're accessing ChatGPT, Perplexity AI, other kinds of generative AI solutions, and certainly it's incumbent upon state and local government IT officials to understand that and to work with employees on training, on literacy, et cetera. So
yeah, I think as we work on that kind of the state agency or the public version of our AI acceptable use policy, I think that is absolutely going to be key. Is fine, how do you use it, when can you use it, and how, in the process of using it, are you able to maintain people's confidential information? How are you going to be able to make sure that the data is not breached or stolen?
Absolutely. So I'm going to shift now to a question for both you and Brady, Representative, and it kind of gets to the heart of the issue that Meredith brought up. You've seen one state and you've seen one state. We're all organized differently. Meredith mentioned two predominant models, a federated IT organizational structure and a centralized IT organizational structure. And certainly in Texas, you have this federated approach. We've talked a little bit in Brady's opening remarks about how the primary IT organization within Texas interacts with the legislature, but of course you have all these agency boards and commissions as well. Can both of you talk a bit about how that complexity in organizational structure kind of affects the conversation on cybersecurity, and or if you have anything you want to highlight about some great interaction or productive work that the agencies are also doing with the legislature alongside DIR.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll start. Texas is lucky to have, as I mentioned, legislators like Chairman Capriglione, it kind of makes it easy to talk about technology, cybersecurity, the costs of that with members that are on appropriations and the members that drive the policy around it. When they understand the technology and how important it is. The chairman and the legislature as a whole have kind of been really forward-thinking, as I mentioned earlier, on how we address this difficult issue, but also like some of the other ones that have cropped up around AI, blockchain, all those different things, and have kind of set a couple things in place that I think have helped agencies and DIR address how we come to it from a funding perspective. One of those things is the prioritized cybersecurity and legacy systems report. Anytime you have what's called an exceptional item for us, where you're asking for money for a program, you don't have to, but you're supposed to put it in the PCLS report, prioritized cybersecurity and legacy systems report. I'm trying not to use acronyms. Sorry, I'm bad at that.
I can explain that later if anyone wants.
That's right.
But yeah, it's one of those things.
Brady's going to have to put $1 in the jar here pretty quick. So that's right.
But we look at that from a third-party perspective, kind of ask some questions about it, put it into a ranking quadrant for the members so that it's one piece of information when they're addressing whether or not they want to fund something, whether it's, all these items are really valid. They're worthy. They should be funded, but we have a finite amount of resources, and you have to make those hard decisions. And that's one of the pieces that we put in place to help kind of look at it differently while also talking to the agencies and us, DIR, with that. And then, as we mentioned, the AI Advisory Council, the House Select Committee on AI and Emerging Tech, all those different things, how we've addressed it, I consider fairly early and thought about it really, thoughtfully on how we're addressing it, and so that we have direction and leadership moving forward, and we're not doing things that would get outside of our bounds, because as we all know, government doesn't like to be first in certain emerging technologies like this. So.
And I think a lot of it has to do with obviously good communication, right, and relationships that the agencies have with the legislature, and then hopefully the legislature either with others in the executive branch, obviously members of appropriations, right? Whenever we start session, at least in Texas, we go every 2 years, 8,000 bills are filed, right? It's hard to get anything put to the front of the line. But over the last few years, working with DIR, we've been able to use that same exact process to go and create a legacy modernization group, a privacy group. We did a cybersecurity group, we did an AI group, right? We're doing all of these things to make sure that the legislature, and DIR in particular, but other agencies, have open dialogue, right? Even during sessions, we'll have CISOs and others from those agencies come and talk to members of the legislature. And, for myself, I helped, really grow this thing called an IT caucus, right? And we have, this is where I brag a little bit, we are the second largest caucus in Texas. Only the Republican caucus is larger. But we're bipartisan, we're bicameral, and we have events where we go and explain to them why this is important. Maybe when I first got into the legislature 10 years ago, when people talked about legacy modernization, it's like, okay, do we really have to invest in this computer? It's fine, good enough for them to do their job, but it's just a little slow. But now it's about making sure that we have safety, right? That everything is updated and patched and so on. And all of this, I guess, just all gets back to really good communication, relationships, and dialogue between the legislature and agencies like DIR in Texas.
Absolutely. Just some great points about the value and importance of that relationship between the branches. You've got to talk to each other early and often about these critical issues, because these systems are 10, 20, 30, 40 years old and inherently insecure. The limited staff that know how to run them, maintain and support them, they're retiring. And so it's a very critical issue. So great points. Meredith, I'd like to move to you. The National Association of State Chief Information Officers surveys state CIOs and now CISOs every year, and you've had a very much touted top 10 list of priorities from state CIOs. It's often reported in the media, et cetera, about what's most important, and cybersecurity has been in the top 10 list, if not at the top of that list, for at least a decade or more. Can you indicated you wouldn't depress the audience here today, so I say that before I ask this question. Are things getting better or worse out there across the states? Can you give us a view of NASCIO's perspective on the current state of cybersecurity across the nation?
So that is a loaded question that I will answer in a few parts. So if I look at the 10-year view, things are getting a lot better in the sense of it's amazing to me to have a legislator sit here and understand all of terminology and be interested in it. And that's not every legislator, right? Sometimes the stuff is really boring. If my boss is watching, don't tell him that I said that. But sometimes it is, right? And so I think the expectation is not that every single one of you understands the specifics of the technology and everything, because no, that's why you have people in the state like your CIO or your CISO, right? But understanding what the representative was saying, why cybersecurity is so important, that's the biggest thing. So as soon as the reason why the question is loaded is because as soon as I say, absolutely, state's got this, nothing else is gonna happen, what's gonna happen? A bad guy is gonna go, oh, well, great, I'll show you, and there's gonna be another big attack. So we're never gonna say that. And I go back to something that we talked about earlier. When Barry and I were first talking about this session, I said, well, cybersecurity can be expensive, but prevention is not as expensive as if you have an incident and you have to respond to it when you've not done basic things. So, remind everybody about that. The last thing that I will kind of say, wanting to bring in your comments and your comments. So when we talk about legacy modernization, so a lot of folks will say, when you say funding cybersecurity, what exactly does that mean? So it is, investing in a lot of these services that can help detect events. It's investing in your workforce so they, as Sean knows, know how to use some of these systems. But one of the other things that did come to light over COVID is that a lot of states have, has anyone ever heard the term technical debt? So that basically means, thanks Dan, I know you have, Dan Wolf, but it basically means systems that are so old, and again, during COVID we saw there could be a system that was built 40 years ago and it is like holding on by the grace of God in a state government. So it's a lot harder to secure those systems. So states are looking at, as you all said, looking at what technical debt that they have, what they need to modernize as far as legacy systems. So again, cybersecurity is a multifaceted issue, which is why, as you said, we don't stop funding it. It's just going to get bigger and bigger. Was that positive?
Well, I think you gave us a balanced answer,
Okay.
so I appreciate that.
Okay.
Certainly if you think about it, we mentioned the age of these systems 40 years ago was before the internet. 30 years ago probably was before any of us had access to the internet. So these are really, really old systems for sure, and need to be replaced and modernized because they're key to administering very, very important programs for all of our states, our local governments, et cetera. Representative and Brady, I'm going to circle back to you. And, one of the focus areas of this session today is certainly expensive but necessary, but also the types of funding that's available to states. I mentioned in my opening remarks some federal grant programs. It'd be great if both of you could talk a bit about how Texas is utilizing federal grant funds for cybersecurity, but also I'd love it if you could hit on this issue of one-time versus ongoing funding and the fact that certainly federal grants really are for those initial investments and that states are going to have to pony up to maintain and support these solutions over time. It'd be great to get your perspective on those issues.
I'll start. So Texas, from our perspective, when we work with the governor's office and members, we always look at all the funding options out there to how to fund cyber from like a state level and a local level, because we kind of think about it globally in Texas as well. One of the things that, there's a lot of need out there from not only a state perspective, and I've kind of mentioned that, but at the local level too. That's where we see most of our attacks at ISDs, local governments. And so we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but the state and local cybersecurity grant program, like when these types of grants are proposed, typically DIR, we'll talk with state leadership and the chairman about whether it makes sense to kind of use this, whether the juice is worth the squeeze. It's kind of one of those things where that shouldn't be the conversation. It should be, there's so much need out there, we should use this. But we have to have those conversations because, there is a lot of red tape around it. We've decided for us specifically to let it go to the locals because that is where a lot of the need is, and we're letting them put in their applications, put it in the grant. And when we talk about need, we have $8 million in for our first year for SLCGP, or State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program, but the locals brought forward $50 million worth of requests, and I know that's going to increase. And that just highlights how much is out there. And you know, for those that are listening that are in DC, I think it might be helpful when I'm thinking about it. You know, when we talked about this a little bit earlier. When we had the COVID grants, they were easy. They had some basic parameters, and then we were able to use it, and we'll get audited later. Great, love it. We used all the funding, and it was amazingly helpful. With some of these, the simpler the better. Less red tape, less restrictive, the better. And we won't have to have those conversations about whether it's worth it. It should be about how is the best way to use it. So.
Yeah. Well, and maybe I'll be just a little bit more critical about it. I mean, I guess, first of all, I'm surprised the federal government passed the bill at all.
That's right.
I guess I'm less surprised that it's not perfect, right? When we were working on the COVID grants, it was simpler, right? The money was gone, would go either directly to the states. The states had a lot of say about the rules and how that money would be taken down. But there weren't really that many strings attached to it. There wasn't this fear that if you did it wrong, you would be on the hook for money into perpetuity. And so the way that this particular grant is being done is making it very difficult, especially in Texas, for local municipalities to want to take this money. Okay. Now, why are we even having this conversation? Because whenever cybersecurity or their cyber attacks are able to breach that, citizens are hurt, right? I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I mean, maybe it's a small thing, but I was at a hotel and the Starbucks line was, you know, around the corner. But people weren't able to get on their flights. People were worried about the stock exchange. They were worried about a lot of the other things they did when they went to work. We did a poll in my district. It was a political poll. Do people care about cybersecurity, right? And this is amongst my voters. And we asked, would you be more or less likely to vote for a state representative who supports cybersecurity investments? It polled higher than border security did, okay? And this is Texas. Wow. Because this is something that affects everybody. Everybody has been in a situation where they've had their personal information leaked. And the fact that it isn't easy, to your point, right, to be able to draw down this money where we're like, okay, there's money there, but it's just too painful to take. That's not the conversation we should be having. And so I'm hoping that we can find some way to fix it.
And Sean, can I give kind of a 50
You can.
state, because maybe you knew
Matter
that
of
I was
fact.
going to do that.
Sure.
So does everyone kind of know when we're talking about the state and local cybersecurity grant program? So Sean mentioned it in the intro. So it's basically, and Sean said this, over 4 years, $1 billion for the entire country. And the majority of that funding has to go to local governments. So state governments have some to use, majority goes to local governments. So the way that states are addressing this, they're either, number one, 100% passing through all the eligible funds to local governments can apply. Number two, they are providing what we call shared services. So the state gets a contract for cybersecurity training, let's say, and local governments can take advantage, low or no cost of those services. And number three is a hybrid approach of the two of those. So states are pretty much a third, evenly divided on those three things about how they're approaching this money. That was not the case in year one, where there was just maybe a handful of states who were doing direct pass-through to local governments. And I think a lot of those reasons for that are some of the things that Brady and the representative talked about. You know, the cybersecurity, the grant program, again, 4-year deal. We're in year 3 right now. And when you think about $1 billion for the entire country over 4 years, although states and locals are grateful for the money, we want this to continue. Again, it is a drop in the bucket from the big picture of things. So if you hear nothing else of what I say, you cannot rely on the federal government to fund your cybersecurity programs, because who knows if it's going to, last. And everybody kind of has to have a stake in this process, as cyber is a team sport.
Very good, very good. If you take nothing else away from today's session, certainly Meredith just made a great point, and also the good representative told you that cybersecurity polls higher than border security in Texas. So quite a revealing
That's a big deal.
statement. Absolutely. I know for Oregon, we have over 100 agencies, boards and commissions at the state government level. We have 36 counties, 241 incorporated cities, over 1,000 special districts, and Oregon was allocated $15 million, 197 school districts. So if we allocated $1 for each jurisdiction, probably the money would not be put to good use. So we have to pursue some of these other strategies, and certainly Oregon is taking that hybrid approach. So Meredith, I'm going to stick with you. Of course, I mentioned you survey your members regularly. What are they telling you about their interactions in their states with state legislatures? And, you know, are you beginning to see any kind of common requests, any common related cybersecurity actions that your members believe state legislatures could take to help address this critical issue of cybersecurity generally, and in particular the funding conundrum that we all face?
So sure, and I think, you know, the good news again is that if I look at the 10-year picture, that because cybersecurity has become really a part of our everyday vernacular, that more people understand that it's important and why it's important. So the progress there and the fact that cybersecurity budgets have been increased over the last 2 years, that's excellent news. I think that is going to continue. So, you know, so that's a lot of the positive, and it's more positive than negative. The one thing, again, that I would caution against is, I think what all of us have said, is to not say to your state CISO or your state CIO or whoever it is who's asking for cyber funding, you know, I'm sick of funding cyber. When is this going to be over? Because again, it's just like highway safety or schools or whatever. It is going to become even more a part of our daily lives. You know, how many of you, we can hardly do anything these days without getting on our phone or getting on a computer, even the way that we access services from the state government, from the federal government. So all of those components, you know, really increase cybersecurity risk. And so then we have to, you know, try and meet that risk. So mostly positive and some room for improvement, or just look at Representative Caprileone and do what he does. Maybe I should just say that. Again, we gave him an award. That's a big deal.
That's
so.
right. That's right. Fantastic. Thank you, Meredith. I'm going to turn back to Brady and to you, Representative. You know, Texas certainly has been seen as a leader in this area. You're doing a lot to help state and local governments. And you've got some specific programs that you've recently implemented that are quite innovative, reaching out to academia in your state to help as well. Can you talk a bit about some of those programs, and in particular your Regional Security Operations Center focused program?
Well, we've worked on a lot of different ways to try and help the state, but I think one of the big things we've done is on the workforce side, right? So, I mean, we all know, right? It's tough to find people that are trained in cybersecurity. But it kind of starts maybe in school, right? When I first got interested in technology was when I first learned how to program a computer, right? So one of the things that we did last session was we put some money in the budget in order to go and provide subsidized and free certification for public school teachers who wanted to learn how to program themselves, right? So that way there's more people can teach other people not only how to program, but maybe they're interested in their love in technology, which hopefully will turn into something later on. The other thing is, as everybody knows, it's hard to find people who are qualified. And I think that's even more evident on the state level. That's partly because the state doesn't pay as well, right? I mean, it has benefits, but it's hard to compete with the public sector. We have money that's been budgeted 2 years ago or earlier in terms of what those salaries would be. So we worked on an idea which, for the state agencies, and in particular, they had a requirement for a 4-year degree. Okay, so someone with a 4-year degree who's a cybersecurity expert is going to be making a lot more money than we could possibly afford. So what we did is we developed an apprenticeship program with DIR, Brady in particular, to go and create this program so someone with a 2-year degree could also become an apprentice, work part-time, help the state, and then after that 2-year degree is completed with the apprenticeship program, they then have, they qualify as having a 4-year degree. And I go to you to say how it's going or what some of the advancements are on it.
So, as the chairman mentioned, that program in particular was really helpful for us. You know, we're working with the Austin Community College on that. And it's a specific program for DIR that we can also, other agencies can piggyback off of and then They can set their own curriculum too if they need to, or add particular pieces to it. But also, I think the most important thing is it's expandable to other community colleges. And as he mentioned, we have a workforce shortage around IT and cyber. Everything that they've been doing to help us as state agency to gather and gain talent, because we don't pay like the private sector. We lose people to the private sector all the time. And all those different things are immensely helpful. And we have a person in our office, Lisa Jammer, who's the People and Culture Office at DIR. She's amazing. She helps us get great talent, helps us retain great talent. But even with her and my executive director, Amanda Crawford, who has built this great culture at DIR, we had lower than average turnover rate at the state. It's still hard to keep people because we're government. I'm going to keep on harping on this. We don't pay well relatively. We're really hard technical jobs. So it's a great program. We're really excited to work on that one. But I think from some of the other programs we have, and we kind of talked about the Regional Security Operations Center, in 2019, Texas was hit. There was a managed service provider who was providing services to a bunch of local governmental entities. 23 were hit with ransomware. Disaster declaration was declared, and DAR, along with a bunch of other agencies, the military department, Texas A&M, DPS, TDM, Texas Department of Information or Emergency Management. Sorry, I just went through a lot of acronyms. Apologize. Correct me on the ones that I didn't cover. But
I can explain that to you later if you need.
But it was one of those things where it was all across Texas, and it kind of brought this idea forward of the regional security operations centers based on how we protect Texas from our statewide SOC. And the goal of that ultimately is to, actually, sorry, let me back up. I'm going to brag on all the different teams that we worked with on that incident. We had everything up and running within days on multiple governmental entities, up and running less than a week. Really, really happy with the work that we did there. And so they're amazing. But with the RSOC program, which came from SB 475, which the chairman sponsored in the House, it's this idea that we can put those different centers at universities and help not only from providing training for local governmental entities, providing tabletops, providing network monitoring, endpoint monitoring, a litany of things across the board. But to go back to the workforce issue, it's actually students in the SOC working on issues, getting hands-on experience, which we've heard from private sector, we've heard from from the universities and the students of, they're actually going to go apply for their first job and have hands-on experience in a SOC, working on cybersecurity, which is, I think, kind of unique from our perspective. And I think that's one of the more important things from the RSOC program that came about. That the pilot program is at Angelo State University. We have 2 more that we've just done at UT Austin and UT Rio Grande Valley. And ultimately our goal in our next LAR legislative appropriations request is to expand that even further, potentially 4 or 5 more RSOCs, which is the goal. Obviously that's their decision. But there's Texas, right? Texas is a big state. And so along with that, and I know I've kind of rambled on a lot here, but we as DIR, we provide some of those overarching state programs or state-funded items to help kind of alleviate that burden for agencies that don't have a bunch of funds in their budget. Luckily, the chairman and some of the other appropriators a couple of years ago have given us the flexibility to do things like endpoint detection and response for agencies at no cost to them. Managed service, you don't have to, you can have your own SIM, sorry, I'm getting too technical. You can have your own instance where you can monitor it and help there, but you have somebody who's backing you up, where you don't have to have somebody 24/7 doing it for those 12-person agencies, which we have. And then, multi-factor authentication for, over 100,000 users, huge. That, as we know, there was a stat one time, it's probably a little outdated, but 98% of incidents could have been blocked or prevented by having some kind of multi-factor authentication. So while it's been around for a really long time, it's always helpful. A pain, sorry, I know I've talked about with some of the LVB staff that are here, that multi-factor authentication can be a pain, but it's helpful. But also assessing what you have with state-funded assessments and pen tests for agencies and institutions of higher education, where you don't know what you need unless you know where you're lacking. And so providing those assessments to figure out how we can improve so that we can highlight that as DIR and the agencies of what we need, where we can improve and how we can take those steps for that next part has been immensely helpful for not only DIR, but also the agencies.
Thank you, Brady. Representative, is there anything else you wanted to say about the RSOCs? Okay, great. I would mention in Oregon, 2023, our legislature passed House Bill 2049 that formed a Cybersecurity Center of Excellence to be jointly administered and operated by three of our primary research institutions, Oregon State University, Portland State University, and the University of Oregon. And we do intend to have, over time, there's great interest in expanding that to our regional universities and our community colleges. So great approach. We're 2 states. There are others out there. Certainly you ought to ask those questions in your own state about whether anything like that exists, and if not, how can it be established. So with that, we are going to move to our next segment. It's the audience Q&A. So if any of you have questions, I would invite you up to the microphone. We are live streamed, and so if you do have a question, would like for you to state your name, the state you work for, and then state your question. And while the first speaker is coming up, Meredith, I'm going to turn to you to get a little more information about an across the nation view. We've, of course, featured Texas here today. I'm from Oregon, have mentioned some of the great things going on in our state, but are there any other states that you believe are out ahead that people ought to pay attention to in regard to cybersecurity generally, and or their innovative use of funding, federal funding, et cetera?
Well, so I first want to pull on a thread that Brady talked about, and cybersecurity workforce. So that is one of the biggest challenges right now. So Brady said states can't, and he's right, governments cannot pay as much as the private sector. But it's not just pay. It is that government, state government especially, has a view that it's not very modern. Again, states weren't offering remote work or flexibility, and that's really what generations who are in the workforce right now, which, by the way, the millennial generation is the largest group of folks in the workforce today. So it was baby boomers, and now millennial generation and Generation X, that's what I am, have taken that over. So these things are very important to them. So where states are never going to be able to match funding, what they can do is modernize and offer some more benefits here. So to your question, what we've seen a lot of states do, in fact, it's really tremendous over the last 2 years how this has happened, is remove that 4-year degree requirement, and it's something like 30 or 40 states now have done it. So there's always going to be jobs that need a 4-year degree, but in cyber and in IT, a lot of times certifications are a lot more important. I know everyone knows about, it's almost a crisis in this country what we're dealing with, the cost of education. I'm so old that I paid off my student loans, but folks who are 20 years younger than I am, I don't know how they're ever going to do that. So if you can do a job without going into, $100,000 or $200,000 in debt, we should be promoting that. So, and there's a lot of states, Maryland was the first to officially remove that degree requirement, and a lot of other states have followed.
Thank you, Meredith. So we do have some questions, so please state your name, your state, and state your question.
Sure. I'm Representative Stephen Meeks from the state of Arkansas, chair our technology committee. We just passed comprehensive cyber in our state here in the last year or so on this issue. The one topic that I'm kind of curious about that you haven't really hit on is, and I'm going to use an example that happened in our state. We had one of our schools that got hit by a ransomware attack, and our negotiators had worked down a negotiated price to $160,000. Well, the local school board had to hold a public meeting because we have very strong FOIA, transparency laws in our state, to approve the expenditure, and the school board approved an expenditure of up to $250,000 to cover that. Well, you can imagine what happened. Within an hour, that price tag went from $160,000 up to $250,000. So my question is I'd just be interested in your take on balancing transparency. We have to have government transparency versus we don't want to let the bad guys know where all of our vulnerabilities and weaknesses are. So just kind of interested in your take on that balance between those two needs. And
any one of our panel members want to address that?
I'll start. I mean, so when we worked on our comprehensive cybersecurity law, we at least on the state level, we considered some of those things in the sense of I'm all about transparency. We all should be, right? But there's a time and a place for everything, right? So we created an ability for talking about secrets that could be damaging if they were revealed, that those could be done in an executive session or a closed session, providing some sort of prohibitions for public information requests. I mean, in that particular case, I mean, obviously, you can do both, right? And we have that in other parts of law when, for instance, a city or school district is trying to deal with harassment claims or lawsuits similar, which is you can negotiate in private, not have to disclose that while that is going on, but once you're complete, then provide some amount of time, and then after that, sure, taxpayers should know how much was spent and for every single line item for everything that's been done. Right. It just doesn't have to be revealed before the ink is dry on the contract.
So, a couple things. From the state of Texas perspective, from DIR's perspective, and Amanda Crawford, my executive director, we mentioned this a couple different times in hearings. We strongly suggest that government shouldn't pay ransoms, and kind of goes back to, well, I'm not going to touch about cybersecurity insurance here, but we strongly suggest that we don't pay ransoms. And one of the things that we've helped with that is we have a couple different programs and agencies that will help rebuild systems. At the end of the day, a lot of times the goal is for the government entity that's hit not to pay more than the ransom. Right. So we can rebuild those systems at hopefully at a cheaper price, or take on some of that burden as a state, and try to prevent and de-incentivize that bad actor from attacking Texas state governments or local governments. So the transparency piece is hard. We've talked a lot with some of the members about what that appropriate level is of transparency here, and as the chairman mentioned, transparency is very important, but not at the cost of what we have to pay, or providing the bad actors information that will help them attack us or take money from the state. The state.
Because you never know who you're paying, right? And I will tell you, so the FBI, who helps states investigate a lot of these things, and a lot of times it's multi-states who are hit by the same actor, they say absolutely do not pay. There's a couple of states who've passed legislation that ban local governments or school districts or whatever from paying. We don't take, we also would strongly recommend not to pay, but sometimes we know that maybe it's not realistic. But what I can say is that in the aftermath or with other districts, use that as an example. Now, I'm not saying that if you have all your cyber ducks in a row that you're never going to get a ransomware attack, that's not going to happen. But in order to, what Brady was talking about, there are things that you can do to make sure that you can recover from that incident without paying the ransom. And CISA, which is the Federal Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, they put out a lot of free resources about the basics to do on that. So if anyone in the room or is listening and you've seen a state or seen a locality that has a ransomware attack, go ask them what they wish that they would have done before that, and use that as an example, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Everyone's going to have an attempt. So hopefully that answers a little bit.
Very good advice. For Oregon, we did pass 2 additional pieces of legislation in 2023. The Oregon legislature did. House Bill 2806 dealt with governing bodies of public bodies in Oregon being able to go into executive session to have discussions about cybersecurity and other critical topics, and that can be shielded from the media initially during the discussion, as Representative Capriglione indicated. Ultimately, there needs to be transparency, but while the decisions are being made, that's an explicit clarification in the law. We also had a bill, House Bill 2490 in 2023 that also shielded information about cyber insurance and about contracts for cybersecurity services. Obviously, you mentioned once folks understand what type of insurance you have, potentially what levels of coverage, all of a sudden their ransom request is right up to that limit, right? So our legislature recognized those critical issues and passed a few pieces of legislation on that topic.
Thank you.
So great. We do have our next question. Again, please state your name, your state, and then state your question.
Hi, I'm Julie from Texas. And I had a question, this is mainly for Meredith, because you had mentioned the funding structure of typically the IT agencies in states doing chargebacks to other agencies. Is there any research into best practices on how to structure funding for these types of initiatives within states? And then obviously if my fellow Texans have any thoughts, I'm all ears, but wanted to see if y'all had done any kind of cross-state analysis looking at funding structures.
So that's such a beautiful question that it's almost like we knew each other before, which we don't. I know these fine folks from Texas, but that's perfect. So I'm glad you asked. If you asked our state CIOs, they would tell you that a hybrid funding approach, and that's what a lot of them have, is the best. Because, again, depending on what authority that the state CIO or CISO has, sometimes they can tell agencies, you will take this basic package of cyber services, and other times they can't mandate that. And then again, we talked about legacy modernization and investing in cyber. So what states have done is they've gone to their legislature and they've asked for maybe a one-time funding. Massachusetts, it's a great example. Their CIO office, Secretary of Technology office, got a one-time grant to do cyber training and education for local governments. So that's really what I've seen that has worked the best. Because also then you have agencies saying, are we, we're paying this money and what are you using it for? The other thing that I have seen, if you have an agency, and you all know who they are, who have a lot of money, a lot of times I've seen they might go to the CIO and say, hey, let's pilot this project, and if it works, we can use our money, our agency money. If it works, then you can maybe replicate that.
Thank you.
Great, and to Meredith's point, the federal government is beginning to clarify the cost allocation guidance for federally funded programs and allowing more shared services to be funded through those once dedicated funding streams. So please, definitely would recommend that you investigate the flexibility that the federal government is beginning to provide, in particular in the health and human services area and some other federally funded programs. I don't know if Texas has anything else you want to add on that topic. Okay, great. Certainly, thank you, sir. Please introduce yourself and then state your question.
Chase Coffey, Government Relations Director for the College Board. Chase Coffey, Government Relations Director for the College Board. So you all spoke about workforce development and mostly working with higher ed. We have a multi-state pilot currently that is similar structured to AP, but it coaches kids on how to, for cybersecurity specifically, but they come out with a industry recognized credential with CompTIA. So I was curious if there was a credentialing agency that you all prefer, and also if you all are doing any work to go to that secondary primary school level to build that workforce pipeline.
Thank you for your question.
I can talk about kind of the national view, and I love that you bring that up too, because it's not just colleges and it's not just high schools. Because I don't know if you all remember, whatever age you were and you thought, oh, this is what I want to be when I grow up. For me, it was an attorney, and I quickly abandoned that in college, okay? But, to get young people really excited about cybersecurity, it does start, you're absolutely right, at that young age. The other thing that I will caution you against is you might notice in IT and cybersecurity, a lot of times it's a lot of white dudes. That's totally cool, but we need some women, we need folks of color to be interested in cybersecurity, and a lot of times that happens in elementary school. And that's just in general, especially little girls get turned away from a career in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, math, and then so cyber is part of that. So I love that. As far as your question about credentialing, I can tell you what a lot of CISOs have. They have their CISSP. A lot of folks do have CompTIA credentials, but there's not a preferred, from our perspective. I will say that a lot that states who have funded those for their folks, they really have grown their internal talent.
Great.
So I won't
Ready?
talk about,
Yes.
I won't talk about specific credentialing, but I think one thing that's important that y'all have both mentioned is, starting at an earlier age, and we've seen some programs. There's a high school in San Antonio that I cannot remember the name of off the top of my head, but they've started a cybersecurity program at a younger age, and we've seen some really talented Texans run through that program and then start into college. And we actually had had a kid who was a freshman in high school, because we do, at DIR, we do high school internships and also college internships. And we had a great group of interns this year at both levels, but starting at that younger age, getting them involved more earlier, and then also the hands-on experience that the high school in San Antonio is hands-on experience with some tool sets, doing some demos and things like that, getting them interested in it. But then also at the higher education level, I know we have a couple universities here from Texas, some that we're partnering with in the room here today, but like working with them to help foster that growth, helping them get hands-on experience and be ready for that next step instead of starting off earlier, getting them excited, and then hopefully get them excited in government, right? We're not going to keep them forever, as we mentioned. The pay's, it's not just pay, it's everything else we've all talked about, but getting them started earlier, getting them here, and maybe hopefully having them for as long as we can, and then hopefully coming back when they're ready to come back to government, because we've seen a lot of that here in Texas too. So it's one of those things where I'm really grateful for the leadership we have in Texas to try to address that as best we can, and look forward to continuing to advance in that.
One last overview of Oregon's legislation. I mentioned our Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. In that same bill, the Oregon legislature funded a Northwest Cyber Camp. There are 5 or 6 community colleges that serve as host locations in the summer. We have somewhere between 100 and 200 high school students that participate. It's a growing program. We also have a community college certification scholarship fund. We have students that meet all the educational requirements. They go through the 1-year or 2-year programs, but they're adults. They are having to think about, do I pay for the $200, $300, $400 professional certification examination, or do I buy groceries or pay for childcare, those kinds of things. So we have this scholarship fund that was just funded, and these are some programs we're trying to implement in our state. So, well, with that, we're at our close, but I do want to give each of our speakers about 30 seconds if you have any final takeaways for our audience. I'll take the moderator's prerogative for a minute or two over. So, Representative?
Sure. Just want to thank you all for being here. I guess if I have a message for the legislators in the room, it's if you don't know who your tech champion is in your state house or your state senate, maybe you should be that person. Your constituents do need the help and support, your agencies do, and so do your fellow lawmakers. This is something that's important not just for your states, but for the whole entire country. And so I hope that we all recognize the need to budget appropriately for cybersecurity.
Thank you, Representative. And Brady, any parting comments? All right, Meredith?
Not a whole lot to add to that because it was pretty perfect, but continue to invest in cyber, invest in your folks, and if you ever need data to help with justification for funding, contact me. All of our stuff is available free of charge on our website, and please use it if it's ever helpful.
Thank you, Meredith. I'd also recommend that you contact NCSL staff for the Technology and Communications Committee, also the staff for the Task Force on AI, Cybersecurity, and Privacy. We have great staff at NCSL and also members that are very willing to help. Well, with that, please join me in thanking our panelists today. I think we've had a great conversation. Just a quick reminder, I believe the next up on your agenda is lunch, and then after lunch there is a session sponsored by our Technology and Communications Committee, AI to Power State Government. It'll be held after lunch from 1:30 to 2:45 in KICC 1, Ballroom D and E. I think it's one of the main locations. So, all right, thank you so much for your
Sean.
time.